Sometimes the most dangerous assumptions are the ones we make about people who don't fit our expectations. In a world where appearances can deceive and stereotypes run deep, one chance encounter between a decorated Navy SEAL admiral and an unassuming woman at a military charity event would shatter everything he thought he knew about combat, courage, and the warriors who defend our freedom. What started as a casual conversation and a dismissive joke about military ranks would end with a revelation so shocking that it would leave a battle-hardened admiral speechless, questioning not just his assumptions, but everything he believed about the nature of true heroism. The small tattoo she revealed would tell a story more powerful than any medal, more significant than any promotion, and more humbling than any defeat he had ever experienced. This is the true story of how one woman's quiet strength and hidden past would teach one of America's most elite military leaders the most important lesson of his distinguished career. The ballroom of the Grand Marriott in Washington, D.C., buzzed with the energy of 200 of the nation's most distinguished military personnel and their supporters. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over dress uniforms adorned with ribbons and medals, while civilian guests mingled in their finest evening wear. The annual Warriors Foundation Charity Gala was in full swing, raising funds for wounded veterans and their families. Admiral James Mitchell stood near the bar, his chest decorated with the Navy Cross, Silver Star, and numerous other commendations earned during his 28 years of service, including 15 years with the Navy SEALs. At 52, he commanded respect wherever he went. His steel-grey hair was perfectly groomed, his posture ramrod straight, and his presence commanded attention without him saying a word. Tonight, he was the keynote speaker, scheduled to address the crowd about the importance of supporting America's warriors. As he nursed his club soda and surveyed the room, Admiral Mitchell's attention was drawn to a woman, sitting alone at a table near the back. She appeared to be in her early 30s, with shoulder-length brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Unlike the other attendees, she wasn't wearing an evening gown or military dress uniform. Instead, she wore a modest black pantsuit that looked like it came off the rack at a department store. She seemed completely out of place among the military elite and wealthy donors. The woman sat quietly, occasionally sipping from a glass of water, her eyes scanning the room with what Mitchell recognized as the careful observation habits of someone with training. But something about her stillness bothered him. While everyone else socialized and networked, she remained apart, almost invisible. He found himself wondering what she was doing there. Colonel Sarah Hendricks, Mitchell's longtime friend and the event coordinator, approached him with her usual efficiency. "James, you're on in 20 minutes. The crowd's excited to hear from you." "Sarah." Mitchell nodded toward the woman in the back. "Who's the civilian over there? The one sitting alone?" Colonel Hendricks followed his gaze and smiled. "That's Elena Rodriguez. She's a donor, actually. Not huge amounts, but she's been supporting the foundation for about 3 years now. Quiet type, keeps to herself. I think she works in healthcare or something." Mitchell studied Elena more carefully. There was something about the way she held herself, a subtle alertness that reminded him of his own operators. But her appearance suggested she was just another well-meaning civilian trying to support the troops. The contrast intrigued him. "Introduce me," he said. Colonel Hendricks raised an eyebrow. "James, you have a speech to give. Just for a minute. I'm curious." They made their way across the ballroom, weaving between tables of chattering guests. As they approached, Elena looked up, and Mitchell noticed her eyes immediately. They were dark brown, almost black, and held a depth that spoke of experiences beyond what her modest appearance suggested. When she stood to greet them, he noticed she moved with fluid precision, like a dancer or athlete. "Elena, I'd like you to meet Admiral James Mitchell," Colonel Hendricks said. "James, this is Elena Rodriguez, one of our generous supporters." Elena extended her hand with a slight smile. "An honor, Admiral. Thank you for your service." Her handshake was firm, her grip stronger than he expected. Mitchell found himself studying her more intently. "The pleasure's mine. Sarah tells me you've been supporting the foundation for several years." "I believe in the cause," Elena replied simply. "Our veterans deserve all the support they can get." There was something in the way she said "our veterans" that caught Mitchell's attention. Most civilians said "the veterans" or "your veterans" when speaking to active military. Her phrasing suggested a more personal connection. "Are you military family?" he asked. Elena hesitated for just a fraction of a second. In a way. Colonel Hendricks was called away by another donor, leaving Mitchell and Elena alone. He gestured to the empty chair beside hers. "Mind if I sit for a minute?" "Of course not." As they sat, Mitchell continued his casual interrogation. "What do you do for work, Ms. Rodriguez?" "I'm a nurse," Elena said. "I work with trauma patients." That must be challenging work. It has its moments. Elena's response was measured, professional. What about you, Admiral? I imagine SEAL operations must be quite intense. Mitchell was surprised she knew about his SEAL background without being told. How did you know I was a SEAL? Elena smiled slightly. Your posture, the way you scanned rooms, how you positioned yourself with your back to the wall when you sat down. Plus, Colonel Hendricks mentioned it when she was introducing some of the other guests earlier. Observant, Mitchell noted, impressed despite himself. Most civilians don't pick up on things like that. I've learned to pay attention to details in my work, Elena said. When someone's life is on the line, small things matter. Something about her response struck Mitchell as practiced, as if she'd explained away her observational skills many times before. He decided to probe a little deeper. Have you ever considered military service yourself? He asked, his tone casual but his eyes watchful. Elena took a sip of her water before responding. I've always admired those who serve, but I don't think I'm cut out for military life. The response felt rehearsed to Mitchell, and he found himself becoming more curious about this unassuming woman. There was something about her that didn't add up. Her awareness, her choice of words, the way she carried herself, all suggested training and experience that didn't match her civilian appearance. Feeling mischievous and perhaps a bit condescending, Mitchell decided to make light of his suspicions. Well, if you ever change your mind, you could probably start as a private. Maybe work your way up to sergeant if you stick with it, he said with a chuckle, his tone implying that someone like her would never make it in the real military. The comment was meant as a joke, but Mitchell immediately noticed the change in Elena's demeanor. Her posture straightened almost imperceptibly, and something flickered in her dark eyes. For just a moment, he saw something that made his SEAL instincts fire a warning signal. Then, just as quickly, her expression returned to its previous calm. That's very kind of you to say, Admiral, she replied evenly, though Mitchell detected the slightest edge to her voice. Before Mitchell could respond, Colonel Hendricks returned to collect him for his speech. James, it's time. As he stood to leave, Mitchell extended his hand to Elena again. It was a pleasure meeting you, Ms. Rodriguez. Thank you for supporting our veterans. Thank you for the conversation, Admiral, Elena replied, shaking his hand. Good luck with your speech. As Mitchell walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was much more to Elena Rodriguez than met the eye. The way she'd reacted to his comment about starting as a private suggested he'd touched a nerve. But what could a civilian nurse possibly know about military ranks that would make his joke offensive? The Admiral took the stage to thunderous applause, but throughout his 20-minute speech about courage, sacrifice, and the warrior spirit, his mind kept drifting back to the quiet woman in the back of the room. Something about their conversation didn't sit right with him, and James Mitchell hadn't survived 3 decades in the military by ignoring his instincts. When he finished his speech and stepped down from the podium, Mitchell looked back toward Elena's table. She was gone. Colonel Hendricks mentioned that she'd left during his speech, citing an early shift at the hospital the next morning. But as Mitchell rejoined the reception, he found himself thinking about Elena Rodriguez more than he should have. Her careful words, her observational skills, and most tellingly, her reaction to his joke about military ranks. It was as if he'd inadvertently insulted someone who knew far more about military service than she was letting on. The feeling nagged at him for the rest of the evening. By the time he returned to his Pentagon office the next morning, Admiral Mitchell had made a decision. He was going to find out more about Elena Rodriguez, the unassuming nurse who had somehow gotten under his skin with a simple conversation. What he would discover would challenge everything he thought he knew about heroes, service, and the warriors who serve in the shadows. The quiet woman in the department store pantsuit was about to teach one of America's most decorated military leaders the most humbling lesson of his distinguished career. But that revelation was still to come. For now, Admiral Mitchell could only wonder about the woman who had disappeared into the night, taking her secrets with her. Admiral Mitchell's curiosity about Elena Rodriguez consumed his thoughts for the entire week following the charity gala. Despite his demanding schedule at the Pentagon, he found himself thinking about their conversation at odd moments during briefings and strategy meetings. Something about the woman didn't add up, and his instincts told him there was a story there worth uncovering. On Friday afternoon, Mitchell decided to act on his suspicions. He called Colonel Hendricks at her office. "Sarah, I need a favor," he said without preamble. "Let me guess," she replied with amusement in her voice. "This is about Elena Rodriguez." Mitchell was surprised by her directness. "How did you know?" "Because you've never asked me about a civilian donor before, and you had that same look on your face when you left her table that you get when you're trying to solve a tactical problem. What do you know about her background?" Mitchell asked. Not much more than I told you at the gala. She started donating about 3 years ago. Always pays by check, never misses a payment. Works as a trauma nurse at George Washington University Hospital. Lives alone in a small apartment in Arlington. Why the interest, James? Mitchell hesitated. Something about her seemed off. Her situational awareness, the way she moved, how she reacted when I joked about her starting as a private. It was like I'd offended someone who knew better. Colin Indrex was quiet for a moment. You think she has military experience? Maybe. Or maybe I'm seeing things that aren't there. But I'd like to find out. I can give you her contact information if you want to reach out directly. Actually, I was hoping for something more subtle. Do you know where she works exactly? What department? Emergency Trauma Unit at GWU Hospital. She works night shifts mostly. James, what are you planning? Nothing dramatic. I just want to observe her in her element, see if my instincts are right. That evening, Mitchell found himself in the waiting area of George Washington University Hospital's emergency department. He'd fabricated a minor reason to be there, claiming to visit a colleague who'd had outpatient surgery. The busy hospital provided perfect cover for surveillance. It took him 2 hours to spot Elena. She emerged from behind the trauma unit doors wearing navy blue scrubs, her hair pulled back in a practical bun. Even in the clinical hospital setting, Mitchell noticed the same controlled way of moving that had caught his attention at the gala. He watched her interact with patients and families in the waiting area. Her bedside manner was professional but warm, and she seemed to have a calming effect on people who were obviously stressed and frightened. But what struck Mitchell most was how she carried herself among the chaos of a busy emergency room. While other staff members moved with purpose but sometimes appeared frazzled, Elena moved with the same fluid precision he'd noticed before, as if she were constantly aware of everything happening around her. During a quiet moment, Mitchell observed Elena speaking with a young veteran who'd been brought in with what appeared to be a panic attack. The man was agitated, clearly struggling with some form of PTSD. Mitchell watched as Elena knelt beside the veteran's wheelchair, speaking to him in low tones. Whatever she said seemed to have an immediate calming effect. The veteran's breathing slowed, his hands stopped shaking, and within minutes he was speaking normally with Elena. Mitchell couldn't hear what Elena was saying, but her body language and the veteran's response suggested she understood exactly what he was going through. It wasn't just professional medical training. It was the kind of understanding that came from shared experience. After 2 more visits to the hospital over the following week, Mitchell was more convinced than ever that Elena Rodriguez had military experience. Her interactions with veteran patients were too knowledgeable, too intuitive for someone whose only connection to the military was civilian support work. Mitchell decided to take a more direct approach. On Wednesday evening, he waited in the hospital parking garage until Elena's shift ended at midnight. When she emerged and walked toward her car, a modest Honda Civic, he intercepted her. "Ms. Rodriguez," he called out. Elena turned, and Mitchell saw her instantly assume a defensive posture before recognizing him and forcing herself to relax. The reaction was pure training, the kind of automatic response that took years of conditioning to develop. "Admiral Mitchell," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "What brings you to GWU Hospital?" "I wanted to apologize," Mitchell said, studying her reaction, "for my comment at the gala last week about starting as a private." Elena's expression didn't change, but Mitchell noticed her grip tighten slightly on her car keys. "There's no need to apologize, Admiral. It was just conversation." "Was it?" Mitchell stepped closer, his voice gentle but persistent. "Because your reaction suggested I'd said something that bothered you." For several seconds, Elena said nothing. The parking garage was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic from the street above. Finally, she spoke. "Why are you really here, Admiral?" Mitchell decided on honesty. "Because everything about you suggests military training, and I can't figure out why you're pretending to be just a civilian nurse." Elena's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Pretending?"
Your situational awareness, how you move, the way you interact with veteran patients upstairs.
"You're not just supporting the troops out of civic duty. You understand what they've been through because you've been there yourself." Elena was quiet for a long moment, studying Mitchell's face. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weariness that seemed far older than her 30-something years. "You don't know what you're talking about, Admiral." "Then explain it to me," Mitchell pressed. "Because I've been in the military for 28 years, and I know training when I see it." Elena's composure finally cracked slightly. "Training? You think what I do is training?" Her voice rose, and Mitchell heard something dangerous in it. "You have no idea what kind of training I've had. The admission hung in the air between them. Mitchell felt a chill run down his spine, not from the cool evening air, but from the tone in Elena's voice. There was something in her words that spoke of experiences beyond anything he'd imagined. "What branch?" he asked quietly. Elena shook her head. "It doesn't matter. It matters to me." "Why?" "Because I made assumptions about you based on your appearance, and I have a feeling I was wrong about more than just your background." Elena looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing her options. Finally, she reached a decision. "Army," she said simply. "What was your MOS?" Elena hesitated. 11 Bravo. Infantry. But something in her tone suggested that wasn't the whole story. "What else?" Mitchell pressed. Elena's expression hardened. "What makes you think there was something else?" "Because infantry soldiers don't move the way you move. They don't have the kind of instincts you've shown. And they don't react to combat veterans the way I saw you react upstairs." The silence stretched between them. Mitchell could see Elena struggling with something, some internal battle between the urge to maintain her cover and the desire to be understood. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ranger Regiment, 75th. Mitchell felt his breath catch. The 75th Ranger Regiment was one of the Army's most elite units, comparable to his own SEAL teams in terms of training and mission capability. But something still didn't add up. "How long?" he asked. 4 years active duty, 2 years in the regiment. "What happened? Why did you get out?" Elena's face closed off again. "That's not your business, Admiral." Mitchell realized he was pushing too hard, but he couldn't help himself. The pieces were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was troubling. "Elena," he said, using her first name for the first time. "Whatever happened, whatever you went through, it doesn't diminish what you accomplished. Rangers are among the finest soldiers in the world." "Is that supposed to make me feel better? It's supposed to make you understand that I respect what you've done." "Do you?" Elena's voice carried a challenge. "Even when you don't know the whole story?" Mitchell studied her face in the dim light of the parking garage. "What am I missing?" Elena was quiet for so long that Mitchell thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her words sent a shock through him. "Rangers weren't the end of my story, Admiral. They were just the beginning." Before Mitchell could respond, Elena got into her car and drove away, leaving him standing alone in the parking garage with more questions than answers. But now he knew enough to be certain that Elena Rodriguez was not who she appeared to be. The quiet nurse had just admitted to being a former Army Ranger, one of the most elite soldiers in the American military. But her final words suggested there was even more to her story, something beyond the Rangers that she wasn't ready to share. Mitchell stood in the empty parking garage, replaying their conversation and trying to piece together the implications of what he'd learned. Elena Rodriguez was a decorated veteran masquerading as a civilian. But what had driven her to hide her service? And what did she mean when she said the Rangers were just the beginning? Admiral Mitchell realized that his investigation had only scratched the surface of Elena's story. The woman he'd dismissed as a well-meaning civilian at a charity gala was turning out to be one of the most intriguing people he'd ever encountered. But the truth about Elena Rodriguez, and the revelation that would leave him speechless, was still hidden beneath layers of carefully constructed anonymity. The Admiral had no idea that he was about to uncover a secret that would challenge everything he thought he knew about courage, sacrifice, and the true meaning of service to country. Admiral Mitchell spent the next 3 days researching everything he could find about Elena Rodriguez through official channels. What he discovered only deepened the mystery. Elena had indeed served in the Army, first as infantry, then with the 75th Ranger Regiment. Her service record showed commendations for valor and excellent performance ratings. But then, abruptly, her record went dark. After 6 years of exemplary service, Elena Rodriguez had simply disappeared from the system. No discharge papers, no medical separation, no transfer records. It was as if she had vanished from the military entirely, only to reappear 3 years later as a civilian nurse in Washington, D.C. Mitchell had seen classified records disappear before, usually when soldiers transitioned to highly sensitive positions that required their official history to be scrubbed. But Elena claimed to be out of the military entirely. The pieces weren't adding up, and Mitchell's curiosity had evolved into genuine concern. Something significant had happened to Elena Rodriguez, something that had driven her to hide her distinguished military service and pretend to be nothing more than a civilian nurse who supported veterans out of patriotic duty. On Saturday afternoon, Mitchell made a decision that went against protocol but followed his instincts. Using his security clearance and connections at the Pentagon, he initiated a deeper investigation into Elena's background, focusing on the period when her official record went dark. What he found changed everything. Elena Rodriguez hadn't left the military after her time with the Rangers. She had been recruited into a program so classified that even Admiral Mitchell's considerable clearance only granted him limited access to the files. The program was designated Operation Silent Shield, a joint task force that deployed highly trained operators into deep cover positions around the world. These operatives worked alone, without official support, in situations too sensitive for conventional special operations. The file Mitchell could access was heavily redacted, but he could piece together enough to understand what Elena had become. After the Rangers, she had undergone additional training in surveillance, infiltration, languages, and marksmanship. Advanced marksmanship, the kind of training that created snipers capable of eliminating targets from distances that seemed impossible. Elena Rodriguez hadn't just been a soldier. She had been a weapon, deployed in operations that officially never happened, working in shadows so deep that even her existence had been erased from standard military records. Mitchell felt a chill as he read through the fragments of information available to him. Elena had spent 4 years in this program, deployed to locations across 3 continents. The few mission summaries he could access spoke of precision eliminations, intelligence gathering in hostile territory, and operations that had prevented terrorist attacks and political assassinations. But then, just as abruptly as her Ranger record had ended, Elena's involvement with Operation Silent Shield terminated. The final entry in her file was dated 18 months before she appeared as a civilian nurse in Washington. Whatever had happened during those missing 18 months had driven Elena Rodriguez out of the shadows and into complete anonymity. Mitchell closed the classified files with shaking hands. The quiet woman he'd met at a charity gala, the nurse he'd watched comfort wounded veterans, had been one of the military's most elite and deadly operatives. She hadn't been pretending to be a civilian. She had been hiding from a past that most people couldn't even imagine. But now Mitchell understood why she had reacted so strongly to his joke about starting as a private. Elena Rodriguez had achieved ranks and positions in the military that were so classified they didn't officially exist. She had served her country in ways that would never be acknowledged, never be decorated, never be celebrated. She was a ghost warrior whose service would never appear in any history book. Mitchell realized he had to see Elena again, but this time with full knowledge of who she really was. He found her at the hospital that evening, taking a break in the small garden area outside the emergency department. She was sitting alone on a bench, still wearing her scrubs, looking up at the stars barely visible through the Washington, D.C. light pollution. "Elena," he called softly as he approached. She turned, and Mitchell saw recognition and resignation in her eyes. You know," she said simply. "Some of it," Mitchell admitted, sitting beside her on the bench.
"Enough to understand why you reacted the way you did to my comment about military ranks." Elena was quiet for a long moment.
What exactly do you know, Admiral? I know you were recruited out of the Rangers into something called Operation Silent Shield.
I know you spent 4 years doing things that officially never happened, and I know that whatever drove you out of that program was serious enough to make you disappear completely. Elena's laugh was bitter. You don't know anything. Then tell me. Elena turned to face him fully for the first time. Why do you care? Why can't you just let sleeping dogs lie? Mitchell considered the question carefully before answering. Because I spent 28 years in the military thinking I understood what service and sacrifice meant. Then I met you, and I realized there are levels of both that I never imagined.
You want to know about sacrifice?
Elena's voice carried a hardness that made Mitchell's blood run cold. Let me tell you about sacrifice, Admiral. She rolled up the sleeve of her scrub top, revealing her left forearm. Mitchell had been expecting to see a tattoo, but what he saw made his breath catch in his throat. It wasn't just a tattoo. It was a memorial. Inked in precise military-style lettering were names. Dozens of names, running from Elena's wrist to her elbow. Below each name was a date and a single word: avenged. Mitchell stared at the tattoo, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. These weren't the names of fallen comrades being remembered. These were the names of enemies Elena had eliminated, each one permanently marked on her skin as a testament to her deadly precision. 43 confirmed kills, Elena said quietly, her voice devoid of emotion. Terrorists, assassins, war criminals, people who would have killed thousands if someone hadn't stopped them. Each name represents lives saved, attacks prevented, innocence protected. Mitchell couldn't speak. In his 28 years of military service, including 15 years with the SEALs, he had never encountered anyone with that level of operational success. Elena's kill count was legendary, the kind of number that belonged in military history books. But Elena wasn't finished. She rolled up her right sleeve, revealing another tattoo. This one was different, more personal. It was a single name, Maria Santos, with a date from 2 years ago and one word underneath. Failed.
"My last mission," Elena said, her voice breaking slightly.
Maria Santos was a human rights lawyer in Colombia. She was getting too close to a cartel operation that had connections to several terrorist organizations. My job was to eliminate the cartel leadership before they could kill her. Elena's hands were shaking now, and Mitchell could see the weight of whatever had happened crushing down on her. I had them all lined up. Perfect shots, clean eliminations. But there was intelligence I hadn't been given, a wrinkle in the operation that my handlers either didn't know about or chose not to share. Elena's voice grew colder. The cartel had already moved on Maria Santos. While I was setting up to take out the leadership, their people were executing her entire family. Mitchell felt his heart sink as he understood what Elena was telling him. I completed my mission perfectly, Elena continued. Eliminated all targets, extracted without detection, operation declared a complete success. But Maria Santos, her husband, and her 2 children were already dead. The people I was supposed to protect died while I was following orders that came too late. The silence stretched between them as Mitchell processed Elena's words. She had been the military's most successful sniper, a ghost warrior, who had saved countless lives by eliminating threats before they could act. But the system had failed her on her most important mission, and an innocent family had paid the price. That's when I realized what I really was, Elena said, her voice hollow. I wasn't a protector, I wasn't a guardian angel. I was just a weapon that the military pointed at problems and pulled the trigger. And when the intelligence was wrong, when the timing was off, when the mission parameters were flawed, innocent people died. Mitchell finally found his voice. That wasn't your fault, Elena. Wasn't it? Elena turned to face him, and Mitchell saw tears in her eyes for the first time. I was so good at killing that I forgot what I was supposed to be protecting. I got addicted to the precision, the control, the power of holding life and death in my hands. I stopped questioning orders, stopped thinking about consequences beyond the immediate target. Elena wiped her eyes and continued. After Maria Santos, I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't be that weapon. So I walked away, disappeared, started over as someone completely different. But you're still serving, Mitchell pointed out. You're helping people as a nurse. I'm trying to save as many lives as I took, Elena said. Every patient I help, every veteran I comfort, every life I preserve in that emergency room is my attempt to balance the scales. Mitchell stared at Elena's tattoos, understanding now why she had hidden her past so completely. The woman sitting beside him had been one of the military's most lethal operatives, but she had walked away from that life to become a healer. She had traded the precision of a sniper rifle for the gentleness of a nurse's touch. The joke you made at the gala, Elena continued, about me starting as a private, it reminded me of how invisible people like me are, how the system uses us and then pretends we never existed. You saw a civilian nurse and assumed I knew nothing about military service. Meanwhile, I've probably done more for national security than most of the decorated officers in that room.
Mitchell felt ashamed of his assumptions, but also awed by Elena's transformation.
Why did you tell me all this? Because you wouldn't let it go, Elena said with a slight smile.
And because I think you genuinely wanted to understand, not just satisfy your curiosity. Admiral Mitchell sat in stunned silence, processing everything Elena had revealed. The quiet woman he'd met at a charity gala had been one of the most elite warriors in American military history. She had served her country in ways that would never be officially acknowledged, sacrificed her own identity for national security, and walked away from it all when the moral weight became too much to bear. What you did, Mitchell said finally, the lives you saved, the threats you eliminated, that was service at the highest level.
Was it? Aylin asked.
Or was it just sanctioned murder dressed up in patriotic language? Both, Mitchell answered honestly. War is ugly, Elena, but the work you did prevented wars. The people you eliminated would have killed innocents. Except when they didn't. Except when the intelligence was wrong and innocent people died anyway. Mitchell understood now why Elena had left that life behind. The precision that had made her such an effective sniper had also made her acutely aware of the moral complexity of her actions. Unlike soldiers who fought in conventional battles, Elena had worked alone in the grey areas where right and wrong weren't always clear. You saved more lives than you took, Mitchell said. I'm certain of that. Elena looked at him with something approaching gratitude. How can you be certain? Because I've read enough of your file to know that every mission you completed prevented something worse. The precision you're ashamed of, the control you think you abused, those qualities made you the perfect person for an impossible job. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the stars barely visible through the city's glow. Finally, Elena spoke again. Do you still think I should have started as a private? She asked, with a slight smile. Admiral Mitchell laughed, but there was no humor in it. Elena, you achieved a level of service that most military personnel can't even imagine. You were already operating at levels beyond anything I've seen in my career. Thank you, Elena said quietly. As they sat together in the small hospital garden, Admiral Mitchell reflected on how completely Elena Rodriguez had shattered his assumptions. The humble nurse who donated to veteran charities was actually one of the most accomplished warriors in American military history. Her quiet demeanor hid experiences that would have broken most people, and her gentle care for patients was motivated by a desire to atone for a past that most people could never understand. Admiral Mitchell realized that Elena had taught him the most important lesson of his distinguished career. True heroism wasn't always visible, wasn't always decorated, and wasn't always officially recognized. Sometimes the greatest warriors were the ones who walked away from war, who chose healing over killing, who sacrificed recognition for redemption. The woman whose sniper tattoo had left him speechless was living proof that service to country could take many forms, and that the most profound acts of courage often happened in silence, without witnesses, without acclaim. Elena Rodriguez had been a ghost warrior who served in the shadows, and now she was a guardian angel who saved lives in the light. In both roles, she exemplified a level of dedication and sacrifice that Admiral Mitchell knew he would remember for the rest of his life.